lot of obviously questions from skeptics and critics. And so I'm going to help everybody with this question by putting this image up. This was sent in. And so the question came in from a critic. His name is Dr. Ken Wolgemuth. He's an old Earth geologist who wrote a book titled The Grand Canyon Monument to an Ancient Earth. And so he commented on the program we did last year. I think it was all of us, actually. Diane, Joe, and John. And it was on polystrata trees and amazing evidence for the worldwide flood. We also uploaded it to our second channel titled Young Earth Creation, and it's got just thousands of views. And so it's been passed around. Anyways, Dr. Ken here, he provided an argument. And so he sent in this photo of basically a summary of the fossil record from the Cambrian to the Holocene. And his question was this: How can you explain how this record was deposited with the respective 5 so-called extinction events?
Okay, I read the other question that came in there too, so I'll try and put the two of them together.
Sure.
The interesting thing about extinctions is they are based on lack of evidence. Now, the classic problem that results is when I was a student, coelacanth, even though it had been found many years ago living, in our textbooks, it was still an extinct creature, and it had evolved, it had become extinct by evolving into a land creature. Now, of course, back in 1938, they found a living one, which has blatantly been ignored for its importance. But yet, if you classified the coelacanth as extinct because you didn't find any in the living world, and you based all your evidence only on the fossil world, then in reality, for some 100 million years or so, coelacanth has existed in the evolutionist record, but not left a fossil, right? So therefore, we know that many creatures can actually survive without leaving a fossil track record at all. So you have to be careful in geology to not base conclusions on a lack of evidence. And most extinctions have that problem. When you look at his assumption about the geologic column, it's again based on Cambrian being at the bottom, the present one being at the top, and it's a Lyellian, Darwinian. It's got evolutionary built into it, so therefore it's got extinction built into it as a concept, not as a fact. It's a concept. They must be extinct because you don't find them in the fossil record. But when you do find them living, and in reality, the sorting of the fossil record is again a bit of a nightmare. I had a friend just 2 weeks ago did a field trip, and he sent me pictures on the field trip, and mostly it was Permian, right? And most of the Permian rocks in Australia are marine. And you look at brachiopods, and you look at all sorts of fascinating marine creatures. And he sent me one slide, which he said, oh, we have an interesting bit of stuff here. We don't know what it is. And then I called him back after I looked at the pictures on my phone, and I said, where are you now? Because you need to go back and get that piece of a tree that's in the pile of brachiopods, right? And he had not expected to find wood. There's no wood referenced in the literature, and yet that's exactly what it was. He went back, I made him go right up the hill and collect it again, and then we looked at it closely, and it's certainly a piece of terrestrial wood. Now, this is more normal than the evolutionists would allow, so that when I'm field tripping in New Zealand, I have one lovely site where the average person can see this for themselves. We collect beautiful fossil wood at this site, mixed in with shallow scallops, shallow sea scallops, and deep sea forames. Those three things from absolutely diverse circumstances are there, but by and large, apart from the shallow scallops, the rest are ignored. Now, you have a geologist who finds them, and sadly, most of his research will be ignored because of the overriding predominant thesis that you must explain it from the bottom to the top. You must explain it by slow deposition, and anything that's not found after a certain point must be assumed to be extinct. Therefore, there had to be a terrestrial catastrophe of some sort. So, Joseph, do you want to take over from there?
I mean, I think you've covered most of it. As I say, when we're getting into the question of boundaries, and we're getting into the question of what you do and don't find in the fossil record, this is the kind of thing which we could spend hours and hours and hours on, and we have done in the past. So I mean, we were asked. I think we've done at least 2 or 3 sessions, if not more, with Standing for Truth on boundaries, and where flood boundaries are, and so on and so forth, right? And that actual question is a lot deeper than just where is the flood boundary. It also goes into the way that you view the fossil record, the way that you view the geological column, and also how the geological column came about in the first place, right? And I always remember I was on a university field trip in a really spectacular location in Norfolk, where you've actually got Cretaceous chalk, which is supposed to be in that area. It's supposed to be somewhere around the sort of 70 million year old, right? And it's on top of Pleistocene, which is supposed to be about 1 million years old, or under 1 million years old. And it's on top, it's the wrong way round. And we were talking to the geologist about this, and he was explaining the mechanism by how you get this, right? It's fascinating, looking to glaciers and all that. But I did bring up the point that even if it was the right way round, you're still missing about 70 million years worth of time. It's just completely gone. Where, how do we know that time actually existed? And he said, well, we have to go elsewhere to find that. I said, well, how do you know which order it is to go in? He said, well, it can be quite tricky because you're basically dealing with a book that has had all its pages ripped out, all of the numbers ripped off and thrown around the world, and maybe even some of the words and letters are missing, and we've got to try and piece it back together. And I was like, right, okay, well, how do we actually do that? And he said, well, we have to assume that the geological column is correct so that when we find the fossils in it, we can fit them into place. And I thought that's very interesting, because it's not a case of, where does the fossil necessarily best fit? It's where does it best fit in our preconceived idea of what the geological column looks like. And then if you trace where that geological column came from, it goes back to Charles Lyell, right, which is based off of the old Hutton ideas, which is based off the old Greek ideas, which was promoted by Steno. And Steno had some great ideas, and he got a lot of stuff right, but the one thing he got wrong is how rock layers actually form. So you'll find that this whole question goes way much deeper than just, oh, let's spend 5 minutes talking about polystrate fossils, or let's spend 5 minutes talking about flood boundaries, right? It's a way of rethinking the way that geology actually works. And that's why it's so vital to do research, to do these experiments, to look at the strata machines, to actually go and collect polystrate fossils and so on and so forth. It gives you a much bigger picture. So we could spend hours on this question, but I'd encourage people to go and watch the boundaries discussions that we've had, are both on Standing for Truth as well as over in Creation Conversations on our Creation Research YouTube channel, and there's plenty more information over there.
Joe, while you're mentioning Creation Conversations, tomorrow at the same time as this program started, Creation Conversations is broadcast out of the UK across to Canada and USA and down under in Australia. So if you want a good program on Easter Part 1, we're calling it, aren't we? Which is a real great Bible study and a real great look at all the where does the word Easter and all of those sort of things come from. That's tomorrow, same time as we've started this program. Any other questions there, Donny?
Yes, I appreciate the responses. Joe, you mentioned the previous flood boundaries presentations, very comprehensive, that we've done together. I am going to link those because we've done 3. We did 2 in a 2-day event conference.
That's right, yes.
And then we also, in our Defending Genesis 2022 conference here at Stand for Truth, we did one titled the Geologic column. So that was fun. I'll link that as well.
I think I did one I think I did some with John. I think I did one on my own, like ages back. Maybe even a year or 2 years back, something like that. But yeah, it was a good set of programs.
It was. So I'll link those for people to please check out, as we are always getting new subscribers. So this is kind of a related question. I wonder, Joe, John, and Dr. Eager, if this is an issue in light of what you're saying. And so this is a common challenge these days. How could a worldwide flood sort specific species, in this case, plankton and trilobites, if, according to the questioner here, base theory, if they have the same density, mobility, habitat, and intelligence?
Well, number one, you'll find that is a question based on absolute ignorance of the geologic column, so that when in the answer I just gave before, where we find petrified wood, we find scallop shells, and we find forams that are specifically today only living at depths of 3,000 meters, all mixed together. That's the norm. Joe, what's your normal finding in a fossil record? Is it everything sorted out neatly, or is
No,
it
it's a
all
mess. It's a mess. And in fact, I mean, it depends. Again, it also comes down, what's your definition of sort? Right? Because does it mean, oh, I'm going to put all the trilobites here and I'm going to put all the wood there and I'm going to put... No, because we find that as a mess, right? But it's interesting that you've mentioned plankton, right? Because if you think about what plankton is, tiny microscopic creatures, right? And if you have a look at something like chalk or a lot of the fossiliferous limestone, it's predominantly made up of plankton. In particular, the tiny little seashells that cover plankton. So we're talking microscopic, right? They're called coccoliths. And these are supposed to have fallen off of the plankton and slowly settle down to the bottom of the shallow sea, where it creates a calcareous ooze, which is a wonderful name. The problem is, of course, we still have these coccolithophores alive today, and when the coccoliths, the little tiny shells, fall off, right, they don't sink. They actually sit suspended in water. So you actually need a mechanism to sort those, those planktonic plates, right? And the only way you can actually do that is by flowing water, by causing them to actually come together as one, to clump all these together and deposit them as they're actually in flowing water. And so my first ever academic paper, which we did for university, was based off of the evidence of transportation and basically flowing water in chalk cliffs. And we did another one in limestone cliffs in Yorkshire. And that's still something that we are working on today. So the evidence out there really says that there not only was flowing water, because flowing water inherently sorts stuff depending on the speed that it's flowing. So in many ways, the only way you can get any form of sorting is by flowing water. But in terms of sorting species, you find exactly what you'd expect to find in a flood. You have mixed environments, you have mixed creatures, you have mixed ecosystems, and they're all dumped in one place. So you find enormous boulders with logs. You find enormous shells and plants mixed together. You find dinosaurs, land dinosaurs, and you find the marine reptiles buried in the same layer. So you're really looking at a mess when it comes to the different species, but really you need flowing water in order to do any kind of sorting of geological layers, full stop.
So point number one, before I hand over to Joe for his section, you may remember when we had our polystrate tree session, if I remember correctly, I showed you polystrate trees, polystrate leaves buried in diatoms. Right now, that's what you find, the classic extreme case of things just simply not being what they ought to be, according to the geologic pictures in the textbooks. Hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Don't go by the pictures in the textbooks. Get off your backsides and get out there in the real world and wander down to the Grand Canyon, or come with me to the south coast of England. Joe, remember where we went down and we found lovely deposits of the lovely white, tiny microscopic creatures in the cliffs of the Dover area, and buried with it was shark's teeth. I had one big fossil fish poo, right? And I also had a plant, and the plant had thorns on it. All right, now that's about as mixed up as you can get. So, Joe, since you're going to talk about thorns, take it away.